Summer break is officially here, and that means kids everywhere are about to get a crash course in how real world money works. We're talking from allowances and summer jobs to, you know what I mean, spending every dollar the minute you get it. You remember when you were a teen in that first job? And that's why Hank Halter, CEO of Delta Community Credit Union, says financial education for children and teens just so important. Hank, great having you here.
Thanks, Dan. Great to be here.
All right, a lot of adults still feel like nobody ever really taught them how money works.
Right.
And now we're saying it's so important for the next generation. Why is
It
that?
sure is. Dan, education's power. You think about money. You use money throughout your entire life, young and old. So it's never too early to start. Studies show that young people that start early, they're going to make better decisions throughout their financial life. They're certainly going to have good habits. And they're also going to have more confidence around money and how to spend money wisely.
My almost 4-year-old asks me every day, why do I have to go to work? And I say it's because I enjoy hanging out with Reams and Hank, but I also have to make some money.
That's right.
And so he's young, but I'm introducing the idea to him, even if he doesn't understand the concept.
Yeah.
Is that too young? I mean, what's the
No.
earliest age you should be talking to your kids?
It's really never too young, and you're doing it exactly the right way. Even as early as age 3 to 5, you're not going to sit down and talk about abstract financial concepts, but around the house, integrating real life examples. The things we have in our house, they were bought with money. What is money? Where does money come from?
Mm-hmm.
Take the trip to the grocery store. As kids, we all went to the grocery store with one of our parents at times. In the grocery store, talk about the difference between things you want in the grocery store, but things you need in the grocery store. Just integrate those real life examples all the time.
Well, that's perfect. Kids going to be going to the grocery store a lot with parents this summer, I'm sure, when they're on break. What are some other easy ways parents can take everyday moments and turn it into a lesson without making it feel like school?
Yeah, well, interesting, in summer, you're out of school, but you still want your child to be learning.
Sure.
And in the summer, giving your child some chores, for instance, and then giving an allowance and tying the two. The chores, the effort, the allowance is the reward. During the summer, most families go on vacation. Integrating your child in your vacation planning. Explain that you're looking for a deal and looking for value. And then usually with vacations, you're making trade-offs. We can't do everything we want to do, but using those examples to help illustrate, there's financial education at its best.
Hank, this is such an important topic and so timely, too. Front page of this morning's Wall Street Journal talks about how it's going to be a cruel summer for teen job seekers. It says could be the worst summer for teen employment since 1948. And they cite a couple reasons: rising inflation, gas prices. It's squeezing some of the small businesses that would typically hire these teens.
Right.
So for those teens who are fortunate enough to go out there and get a job this summer, how should they be thinking about that first paycheck?
The first job is really important for many reasons, educational in particular. That first job really indoctrinates a young person into what they're going to do for their life. They're going to work. They're obviously going to earn a paycheck, but where that summer job also provides educational benefit, they're going to learn what comes out of your paycheck. You've got income taxes, Georgia income tax, FICA. You might even have some dues that come out of that paycheck. And then it also gives them the opportunity to learn about not spending all of that paycheck. That's I think you mentioned at the beginning, the idea of don't spend all of your paycheck, set some goals. Those goals might be for future education, maybe a future car, maybe planning a trip with friends later, but learning the difference between bringing in money. Some of it goes to taxes, but some of it needs to go into savings.
If I may opine on that note, I think all teens should be taught the magic of compound interest at an early age. Because that would have gotten me interested into saving and investing when I was getting that first paycheck as a teen, as opposed to going out there and spending it all.
Right.
And who knows how different life could look different.
Oh, yeah, it's always changing, always changing. But many financial institutions, Delta Community in particular, we have a youth savings account.
Okay.
So as a parent, thinking about education, taking your young person, opening that youth savings account, you'll be a co-owner or a joint owner on the account, but make that deposit, and then each month show your child how it's generating interest, and then you can use that to further your discussion and illustration about goals, what you're saving for, and what you'll use that money for down the road.
You've given us some great tangible ideas for what parents can do this summer. What about schools as we get back in session in the fall? Are we doing enough as a society to educate our youth financially?
That's a great question. Well, first of all, education should never stop. Obviously, it should start as young as possible. But even you and myself and everyone else, the economy is complex. It's always changing. It's dynamic. We're always learning. When schools get back in session, states like Georgia have instituted financial education to be a mandatory part of the curriculum. And I think that's great because it really emphasizes the importance of financial education. We're going to be using budgeting, whether you realize it or not. You're budgeting every day. You're spending every day. You should also be saving. And the combination and interrelationship is critical there.
Hank, any final thoughts? And maybe what would you say to parents out there who say, I haven't even figured this stuff out yet? Who am I to be teaching my kid?
Don't panic. It's never too early to start, and it's also never too late. Look at financial institutions, even some not-for-profits, government agencies. Delta Community, for example, we offer a program in the summer called Cool Cash Camps for kids. It's for young people and teenagers. It's an opportunity in a fun and educational way to learn about money. But even as parents, Delta Community has an award-winning financial education center. So parents, as well as young people, can take advantage of free workshops and online courses to further learn about money, particularly in this dynamic, changing environment that we live in.
All right, so let's start with this. The top line for somebody who's in the market, whether they're trying to buy or to sell with this latest data, would be what?
The top line is that year over year, and for the fourth quarter in a row, we're seeing negative year over year growth. So what that means is that since the second quarter of 2025, prices have fallen compared to a year earlier. And that's continued now for four straight quarters.
So 4 straight quarters, that's 1 full year. Can you back that timeline out a little bit for us here? What do things look like now compared to, say, 5 or 10 years ago, particularly in that pandemic era? How are we doing compared to then?
Pretty good. So, if you zoom out, things are actually in relatively good shape for most anybody who's owned a home. You've seen precipitous growth in terms of your home equity. And if you zoom out even farther, you're looking at since the data was collected first started being collected in 2007, the Federal Housing Finance Agency has Atlanta homes on the median up about 150%.
For the city of Atlanta, for people who are in Atlanta, how does our situation compare to the national trend line?
So it's not doing as well as the national trend line, but there's a lot going on in the national number. I mean, that is averaging out cities and states all over the country in very different circumstances. So I wouldn't put too much concern in the fact that Atlanta is lagging the national average because you've got towns like Chicago seeing 6% year over year growth. You've also got places like Austin, Texas, where you've got over the last couple of years, nearly 25% drop in prices. So, it's all a little bit relative. Atlanta's not doing so bad, but the amount of building that's taken place in the South has weighed on housing prices. And, we're seeing a little bit of a drop in nominal terms.
I suspect people watching may fall, and they will fall, into a number of different camps. A few of them would be home buyers, potentially, and potential home sellers. Can you take a minute to speak to each of those two camps? What does this latest data mean for people who want to sell their home, and what does it mean for people who want to buy a home?
So for sellers, if you're anchored to the peak prices that you remember from 2022 or 2023, then you're going to be disappointed. You can't sell your home for that amount of money anymore. Maybe there are some rare exceptions, but by and large, those prices were too high. That was kind of the height of the craze for buying homes with still low mortgage rates. We're in a very different circumstance today. People are not coming out to buy and get into a bidding war over homes that are simply not worth what they were a few years ago. People cannot afford to pay the same price and carry that mortgage, given mortgage rates are 2, or in some cases 2.5 times what they were just a few years ago. For buyers, you have a little bit more negotiating room. Now, for the most part, a lot of buyers are sitting on the sidelines, just waiting for mortgage rates to come down. But I would tell people that if you are financially able to buy now, you could go out and look at homes and get seller concessions, find opportunities to get seller repairs, and not necessarily get into a bidding war because there's simply less competition today for the homes that are for sale.
You get at something here I want to tease out a little bit more. In your opinion, does the dynamic we're seeing playing out right now, whereas you pointed to sellers should not be anchored to some of those really high prices that we saw maybe 3 or 4 years ago, is that a result of the fact that mortgage rates are substantially higher now than they were in that core pandemic area, or is it a result of increasing supply where perhaps more homes have been built here in Metro Atlanta, or is it a combination of those factors and maybe some others?
It's a combination of both of those, and I would also say, with a slight dash of simply buyer frustration. People are tired of seeing homes appreciate at such a rapid level, and a lot of the people that were eager to buy homes in the last few years, they've done so if they were financially able. And for those people who may not be as financially stable, or simply are waiting for things to improve, they're comfortable sitting on the sidelines indefinitely until things get to a position where they feel like they're ready to buy.
And let's talk about that future timeline and trend lines. Folks are always keeping a very close eye on all of that. Is this trend going to continue, or do you anticipate things could be shaken up in the next 3, 6, 12 months, or maybe even further down the line?
I think this is going to continue for quite a while. As long as we have mortgage rates in the sixes, I don't think we're going to see much more housing activity. There's a mental line in the sand when it comes to average mortgage rates below 6%. And at the moment, we've gotten farther away from that than we were at the beginning of the year. So that is a big impediment. But also, we need incomes to catch up to the prices that homes are today. Homes have, across the country, but certainly in the Atlanta metro area where there's been a lot of interest in buying homes, prices have grown substantially from where they were in 2019 and 2020, to the point where it's priced many people out. You can take mortgage rates out of the equation. Prices rose so much, so fast, even if we still had 3% mortgages, some people would be priced out simply based on the prices they are today. And that's one of the factors. We need to have incomes, and this is going to take years, start to catch up to where prices move to. So we will hopefully get lower mortgage rates in the future, but we're not going to probably be back to the 2s or the 3s. Maybe we can get to the 4s, but it could take years given where interest rates are.
All right, Stephen, we are a little short on time. I'm going to ask you this last question here, and you've alluded to it throughout our conversation, but I want to put it to you directly. For somebody who is thinking about buying their first home right now, what advice would you give them?
The best time to buy is when you know you can afford it. And so if you have the money to go buy a home and you find one that you like, don't wait for the perfect scenario, because that simply isn't going to come along. That house may not be available forever. If you wait 6 months or 12 months, it could be gone and you're starting from square one. So if you find a house you like, you have the money to own it, and the mortgage rate is something that you can comfortably afford, there's no time to wait.
Dr. Jody Guest, Senior Vice Chair of Epidemiology there at Emory School of Public Health. Dr. Guest, for viewers just waking up to this story and learning about it, how much more serious is this Ebola outbreak from the last time we talked?
Yeah, this outbreak is really rapidly progressing and is currently our 3rd biggest outbreak ever, and likely to surpass the first and second one. There are a lot of unknown cases still out there, and it is not a contained outbreak at all in the DRC.
And so help us to understand exactly, how does Ebola spread?
Ebola spreads from someone who is symptomatic, and prior to being symptomatic, you are not contagious to another person. But once you're symptomatic, it spreads by bodily fluids and contact with that. That is why we commonly see family members and healthcare providers taking care of an ill person being some of our most likely cases.
And so at this point, we say that the CDC reports and public health officials say the threat to the United States still remains relatively low. But at what point do public health officials become more concerned about the spread outside of Central and East Africa?
You know, we're always concerned about infectious diseases spreading. We are a global community for sure, but the U.S. risk does still remain quite low. We do not have confirmed cases that have not been in Africa, outside of Africa, particularly the DRC and Uganda. But we want to make sure that we are players and part of containing this. That is partly how we will all stay safe.
And our role so far here in Atlanta being one of the U.S. airports involved in that enhanced screening. Does this enhanced screening mean people in Atlanta should be worried, or is it just more about preparedness? Because people always think like, oh, it's here because they're using the airport.
It's about preparedness. We want to make sure we are keeping the public safe. And again, the risk to the United States, it currently is extremely low. But what they are doing at the Atlanta airport and 3 others across the United States, they are looking at people who are coming from our affected areas who've been there in the last 21 days, and they are checking to make sure they are not symptomatic. They're also doing it before they leave and get on an airplane. Again, this is to protect the public, but also to get health care to those who might be sick as quickly as possible. They have not screened anyone who is positive.
So what symptoms would health teams actually be looking out for in someone who recently traveled in from an outbreak area?
They're specifically looking for temperatures. And so anyone who's coming in from an outbreak area who was there in the last 21 days will have a temperature taken. But they are also looking for other respiratory illness symptoms as well. And then they will do a further follow-up if they see anyone with these symptoms, because they can be very vague symptoms and be many other things besides Ebola. But they are our early warning signs.
And so, you know, world's busiest airport, a lot of people traveling through, a lot of people watching this newscast and learning that the screenings are happening there. If I'm traveling through Hartsfield, should I be worried?
You should not. This is about public health doing what it should be doing, which is protecting the public and making sure we find cases so we can provide care to them as quickly as possible. We do not anticipate seeing many cases coming through the Atlanta airport, but we want to make sure if there are any that we would know that. And again, we have not seen any come through the airport at this point.
All right, we got about 20 seconds left. What lessons do you think public health officials learn from previous Ebola responses here?
We are all connected, and we are all safer when we are part of the prevention and protocols and help on the ground, and we need to be part of that now.
Water safety experts say drowning can happen fast and sometimes even quieter than parents realize. Joining us now, Megan Benvenuto with the YMCA of Metro Atlanta. Megan, it's great having you on the show this morning. Thank you for your time.
Well, thank you for having me.
You know, every summer we hear these heartbreaking stories of drownings and kids. What do parents get wrong this time of year?
You know, the biggest thing that parents can get wrong is not having a dedicated water watcher. You always want to have someone that's 100% dedicated to watching kids when they're in the water. So that means screens down, eyes up, 100% focused on what's going on. And if you want to check your email or find out what's going on online, have somebody else watch the kids.
You know, drowning not necessarily splashing around and yelling for help. It can often happen pretty quietly, right?
It can happen in an instant, and you know, it doesn't look like it does in the movies with like big arms flailing around and lots of staying at the surface. It's normally panicking, swallowing water, and just going underwater really quietly. So that's why you want to have someone that's paying attention to where kids are. You want to make sure that the kids are wearing life vests if they don't know how to swim. Making sure you have a Coast Guard approved life vest is the number one thing that you can do to make sure that your kids are safe. If they go out a little too far, they're going to float.
And that, I mean, to me is non-negotiable for kids of all ages when you're at a Georgia lake, for example. How do the rules change when you're at a lake versus a pool, in your opinion?
So, you know, the rules should be the same. You should, if you don't know how to swim, you should always have a life jacket on. If you're on the water on a lake, you should have a life jacket on no matter what. Just because you can fall in the water at a lake, it's dark water normally, and so it's harder to find someone. A lot of the time this time of year, the news agencies will have a little graphic that shows the swimsuits and what they look like when they're actually in the water. So bright orange is a great color to wear. It might not be the kids' favorite color, but it's the easiest to see them in when they are in the water.
How important are formal swim lessons, and what age should we start those?
You know, formal swim lessons are really important. They help kids gain confidence. They help them understand the rules of the water. And at the Y, we start as young as 6 months. So we, at that point, we have them in the water with families. If you're a Y member, they're free. And it's a wonderful way to get your kids started so that they know they always have to ask permission to go in the water, and that they know that like the safe things to do. So asking permission, making sure a parent is with you. You always want to be within arm's reach of a non-swimmer so that you can help them. And it really just sets the stage for building confidence and helping them feel good in and around the water. And we start at 6 months, but we go all the way up to adult lessons. So it's never too late to learn at the Y, and it's never too late to learn anywhere. Like swimming is a lifetime skill. It will always help you feel better. It's a great exercise. It's a wonderful thing to be able to do.
So true. I'm a former high school swimmer. Still love the pool these days, and I got a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old. I just signed up for swim lessons this summer, so you got to get them started young. Megan, I got to ask you, because this is a story I've done before, disparity in drownings, and I checked the CDC last night, and they said for black people under the age of 30, drowning rates are 1.5 times higher than white people of the same ages. I mean, we could talk about the whys forever, but what do you think the fix is?
You know, the fix is swim lessons. Emory just did a study, and it found in Atlanta or in Georgia, 1 in 3 kids don't know how to swim, and that's across the board. But for Black children, it's actually 1 in 2 don't know how to swim. And so what we're doing is we want to make sure that all kids have access to be able to learn how to swim, be able to have access to lessons. So the Ys are open. We removed our membership requirement. You don't have to be a member to take lessons, but just finding a place that you can go that's trusted, and a lot of families trust the Y. That was also in the study, that we're considered a trusted partner. So finding a place that you feel comfortable bringing your kids so that they have those skills. They don't have to be a high school swimmer or an Olympic swimmer, but you want them to be able to get to safety if there's a problem. So if they get pushed into a pool at a pool party, they can get to the side of the pool.
More than 100,000 people in the United States right now are waiting for an organ transplant, and for many recipients, it means a second chance at life and being able to get back to doing what they love. So next month, transplant recipients, living donors, and supporters from all across the country, they're going to compete in what's known as the Transplant Games. It's a sporting event celebrating the power of organ donation and all that means to the recipients and to those who donate. Joining us live is Atlanta Transplant Games athlete Steve Lyons. Steve, thank you for being here. Welcome.
Thank you for inviting me.
So let's talk about this. The Transplant Games. For somebody who isn't familiar with that, what is the Transplant Games?
Transplant Games of America is in the United States, and it rotates around the country every 2 years, but it's sort of like the Olympics. They have many Olympic-type sports, but they also have ballroom dancing and trivia challenge, depending on from tennis, which I do, and all the way down to very easy stuff. So it can match the abilities of the people who are there. And they also, not unlike the Olympics, it's age bracket on the hard sports, like the 70s or the 60s, the 50s, and they give out awards and trophies and medals.
And this is a gathering of folks who have either received an organ transplant or are supporters, they're living donors, or families and loved ones of those who have donated, right?
They all count, but only the people that have received solid organ will be in the games themselves. For people with tissue or eye, there's special events for them, a 5K run and so forth, but the solid organ transplants are the ones that, because they're all on immunosuppressants, and
sure,
they would have died without a transplant.
And you yourself are a transplant recipient,
yes,
right?
I've received a liver 14 years ago at Piedmont, and it was a long journey to that point, and it's nice to be able to do the things I'm doing now, because it was close to ending.
Talk about and share, if you would, how that transplant changed your life.
Well, I mean, let me give you a history of it all.
Sure.
Started actually when I was about a year old. I had pneumonia 3 times, And then when I went to UCLA, when I was about 20 years old, they did a chest x-ray and said, we need to remove your upper left lobe because it's damaged. So they did that. And I came down with hepatitis after that, and that was 2002. They didn't know what kind of hepatitis it was. It wasn't A, it wasn't B, and then they gave it a name, non-A, non-B, because it wasn't either one of those. And then finally, many years later, it was hepatitis C, and you probably have heard of hepatitis C, and that worked on me, and I was very tired, and they finally came up with a treatment for it. It was interferon, but it was tough. I had 2 days a week I felt good. For 6 months I did that, and my liver started to decompensate. I started getting ascites on in my abdomen, and they had to drain me, and then they referred me for a transplant. And that was in 2003. They referred me in 2004. I was listed for a transplant. Although for livers, you have to be the one closest to dying to be number one, which makes sense. Other organs, time on the list counts, but in my case, I was on the list for 8 years. And on my birthday, my doctor called me, and I said, "Oh, he's calling me, wish me happy birthday." And he said, "I have good news, bad news. Which you want first?" I said, "Okay, the bad news." He says, "Well, you have liver cancer. The good news is you're going to the top of the list, and as long as the tumors don't get too big."
Wow.
Because they grow, and if you get too big, they take you off the list. So it's a touch and go kind of thing. One procedure they did was to put chemo beads around the tumors to reduce the size so they wouldn't get too big. And if your bilirubin's too high, they can't do the procedure. The day before, my bilirubin was sky high, and we had a prayer service at our church on me, laying hands and stuff, and prayed for that.
Wow.
And it miraculously, by answered prayers, dropped to the level, and I got that treatment. Allowed me to continue on a few more months until I got my transplant April 28th, 2012. So it's been 14 years. And I was skin and bones. I had broken my leg about 3 weeks before. I had a boot on. Had a boot going into the operating room, and I was on my last chance, and so it's wonderful to be alive.
What a journey you have been on. Your family, your loved ones have been on. My goodness, 14 years ago now you are competing.
Yes,
you
I
get to
compete.
be an athlete, and I mean, talk about new lease on life. That's a little cliche, but it really seems true.
Yeah, it's the celebration, first, you have to be 9 months out before you can go. So the first one was in Houston, Texas in 2014, and I did a number of different sports and got a number of medals. And I brought a few medals here from all the various transplant games, but I've been to 6 U.S. games and 2 international world transplant games. And the first one I went to was in Malaga, Spain. And there were about 200 people from America there, and we were getting a big team pictured. And I was standing in the back because I was a little taller than most, and somebody came and said, "Here, hold the flag." So I'm holding the U.S. flag in the back of the picture.
Wow.
And that was cool. And then all of a sudden she comes up to me after the picture and says, "Okay, you're first." We went into a bull ring. That was the opening ceremonies in a bull ring in Spain, in Malaga, Spain. And I got to carry the U.S. flag leading the Team USA. And that was phenomenal.
What an incredible experience. I've got to imagine when you get together with other transplant recipients, the conversations you must have and the gratitude that just must be so palpable at these events has got to be astounding.
It is. Now, another reason for the games is to make awareness for organ donation. And you mentioned how many are on the list, but 17 die every day waiting for a transplant. And so organ donation is one thing that happens in the cities and states that this goes to. It tends to rise because of all the publicity about the transplant games, and people start signing up. So that's one of the great things. But we need more people to be organ donors. And if anybody's watching right now, they could, and they're not. If you have an iPhone, you can go to the health app, hit your picture, and then organ donor shows up, and you can hit it and fill out the form and become an organ donor. So if you're not one, do it, because it would save lives.
And Steve, you get to something, we're short on time here, but I don't want to let you go and let our audience go without underscoring what you just said there, because I mean you're living proof that a transplant really can change your life.
Absolutely.
But if you could talk to anybody right now who's thinking about it, maybe they're on the fence, maybe they even haven't thought about doing this before, what would you say to somebody to share your message, your experience, and make the case for becoming a donor?
Well, when I've talked to people, sometimes people have heard rumors about different things, and most all of them are false rumors. When you're an organ donor, it's after you have brain death. You are gone, and they put you on things to keep the organs going still, but you have died. So there's people that don't sign up because they're afraid they're going to kill them before it's time. But it's all above board. The people that come and retrieve the organs are totally different people than are taking care of you in the hospital, if you were in the hospital at the time. And just sign up. And the other thing is that each state has its own way of signing people up. Some states do a wonderful job and others don't. However, the way they do organs assignment, they ship organs from, for example, Georgia to New York. New York has a very low sign-up rate compared to Georgia. And that's not really fair. It should be a standard, in my view, a standard around the country. So those states that aren't signing up as much should be changed in some way so that they could be as good as Georgia is.
And it is a decision that can truly change lives, and you're living proof of that.
Absolutely.
State Representative Amari Crawford in the House to talk about some new legislation that just passed under the Gold Dome having to deal with sickle cell. Mr. Crawford, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So, first of all, congratulations to you and to all of the representatives and people who are working around the clock and across the aisle to get this piece of legislation passed. For those who are not familiar, can you just break it down? Give us a couple of sentences about what this new law will do.
Yeah, thank you very much. House Bill 334 is going to require the Department of Community Health to conduct an annual review of the medications and treatments that are used to treat people impacted with sickle cell disease in our state. We want to make sure that our data and the medications that are being used, that as they evolve, that they're meeting the needs of the people impacted by sickle cell disease.
And we know that it impacts so many people, especially right here in Atlanta, disproportionately Black and brown people as well. What was the need for this law?
We wanted to make sure that, again, we're meeting the needs of the people who have sickle cell disease. As there are medications and treatments evolving, we want to make sure that we evolve as well in our data collection. You are right that it disproportionately impacts Black Americans. There are about 15 to 16,000 people in our state who have sickle cell disease. And so this is going to allow us to have better data, do better research, and to make sure that we're meeting the needs, especially for people who are Medicaid recipients.
That's right. We know that illness has no party. We know that you had to reach across the aisle to get Republican support for this law to pass. What does that say? Because a lot of the times when we talk about things that are happening under the Gold Dome, people hear about division, people hear about trading and not crossing across the aisle, but then you hear about something like this that's impacting people's everyday lives, and you see that camaraderie. What does it say that Republicans did get on board with this?
But what it says is that oftentimes during our 40-day session, and you come down there frequently, there are a lot of bills that have to be discussed and have to be considered. I think this is a bill that everyone got on board with, that I spoke with across the aisle and within my own political party. It was very easy for us all to agree with this legislation because as I was presenting, I had to explain to people that of the 159 counties, we know of 156 counties that has at least one person impacted by sickle cell.
Right.
So it's not anything that's unique to Atlanta, although the metro area has a larger number of people impacted by sickle cell. But we know that every county has, or almost every county has, one person impacted. This bill can save a life. And so while we may have division on certain issues, life-saving measures should never be one of them.
I know that's right. Say that again. What does this law mean for people who are watching this right now? What does it mean for them?
for anyone that has sickle cell disease and you're living with sickle cell disease, there are challenges that you have that other people may not ever really understand. This bill will allow people impacted by sickle cell to finally have a voice. They will be able to speak to what medications and treatments are doing to help them, or whether medications and treatments are helpful at all. So when we conduct this annual review, again, people impacted by sickle cell and specialists will be able to determine what's helpful. And this now gives a voice for people who, for a long period of time, may not have had an input on the medications and treatments that they're receiving.
That's right. That's right. We know that this is one step, a very big step forward. We know that there is still work to be done. What else is there to be done, especially as you're looking ahead to the next session?
I think that there are a lot of opportunities where we could close some health gaps and disparity gaps for people impacted by sickle cell. One thing that we could do is also, there was a bill that I introduced that did not move this session, but I hope it will next session, that will educate some of our teachers and faculty and staff at our schools so that they will know how to adequately respond to someone having a sickle cell episode.
Okay.
Oftentimes that may happen, and our teachers, faculty, and staff members, they may not be equipped with what they need to do or with the knowledge on how they can help save someone and respond quickly. So those are some other things that we could do, and there are a lot of other issues, of course, that we can address, not only with sickle cell, but other healthcare disparities.
I know the big one is how to pay for it.
Oh,
and that's
absolutely.
been something even at the national level down to the Gold Dome. Looking ahead, we see obviously there's a midterm election, so it's going to be depending on who gets in those seats, how the balance of power is going to shape up. But where do you see that conversation of paying for healthcare going in Georgia?
I hope that it goes to a place exactly what you're saying. How do we make sure that people who may not have access to medical care, how are they able to pay for the help that they need? And in the same method of presenting the sickle cell legislation that passed last session, I think it's the same type of conversation. This is going to impact someone in your district, and health should be our main priority. We oftentimes have legislation down at the Gold Dome that may address what I like to call conveniences. We need to prioritize health. That needs to be the first thing that we prioritize, not only in our state, in every state, and at the national level.
We are now joined by Yoda Suris, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, to talk more about the REPORT Act and how it is helping combat online child abuse and exploitation. Welcome, Yoda.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you so much for being here, for your time. Viewers might not be familiar with this new bipartisan law, the REPORT Act. Can you break down what this is, Yoda, and what it was meant to do?
Absolutely. It's really a very simple bill. So the REPORT Act was passed 2 years ago. It took a little while to come into effect so everybody could get ready for the impact and the reporting it required. But quite simply, what the REPORT Act does is it requires for the very first time online platforms, social media companies to report instances of child sex trafficking when it appears on their platforms. Prior to passage of this act, those types of exploitation against children, the trafficking of children online, was not something that had to be reported to the National Center. So we're seeing really a whole new view of that crime and the trend online now that the reporting is mandatory.
This is something that will put pressure on tech companies, requiring them to do more when it comes to that accountability sector of keeping our kids safe, making sure that it's not just on parents or families, but when it comes to what additional requirements there are for tech companies now, what will they have to do because of this act?
Absolutely. So quite simply, they need to report these crimes to NCMEC whenever they become aware of it. So if a user is online and encounters this and makes a report to the company, if a child is approached by somebody who is trying to entice them into a trafficking situation, any and all of those situations, as soon as a company becomes aware of it, they now need to make a report to NCMEC's cyber tip line. That gives NCMEC the ability to review those reports, add some value to those reports, but most importantly, get it out to law enforcement so they can look for that child, help recover that child, and then pursue the offender.
Yeah, when you mentioned Nick McGimmy and the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, obviously the biggest entity I know of here in the country that protects children, especially online. Talk about the gaps, Yoda, because this is only one step in addressing what we're seeing as a whole here nationwide. What gaps still remain? What are you watching closely?
Yeah, absolutely. So, unfortunately, we know that individuals who want to exploit children, who want to offend against children, they will always find a new way. There is always new technology. There are always new social media platforms for them to exploit. So, we are always looking out for the next crime trend. Again, getting these reports, like the Report Act enables us to do, enables us to be on the cutting edge of seeing these trends, being able to alert law enforcement, but also really to take that information, create educational materials, be able to educate parents and schools and social service agencies, really anyone who is around children, on where children are being exploited, how offenders are looking for them, really try to get out ahead of it. The Report Act is amazing because we're now actually getting the reports. We knew the crime was occurring at a much higher level online. The Report Act really is confirming that. Over 105,000 reports last year that we received relating to child sex trafficking. So the numbers are immense. Again, we knew those reports were there, but we really want to get out ahead of it. We don't want there to be that many reports. We don't want there to be that many children who are victimized. So we're really always trying to look at, what can we do to make companies more aware, to help parents and children recognize this trend and report it to us and evade offenders.
Yeah, you hear about that double-edged sword sometimes. There are more reports that we're seeing, which is poor because, we know this is happening far too often, but at the same time, people are feeling much more secure and confident in reporting those cases. I want to talk to you, Yoda, about the ways that we see children being exploited for parents out there, guardians, loved ones, looking out for those red flags. What should they be looking for to keep their children safe?
Absolutely. It's a great question. And we know children are online really from age 5 or 6 all the way through, into being teenagers. So they're using a lot of different platforms. As I mentioned before, there are always new platforms, there are always new messenger and chat and applications. New technology, obviously, artificial intelligence is one that we're talking about and dealing with quite a bit, just like everybody around the world is as well. So the things that we recommend to parents and guardians is, first of all, ensure that your child feels comfortable coming to you if there is something that disturbs them online. Somebody approaches them, somebody asks them to share information or content. Let them know that they really can't make a mistake. It can all be addressed. So having that sort of dialogue, making sure your child feels comfortable saying, "I think I perhaps shared something, or I engaged with somebody online, or somebody is bothering me online." All of those types of goals and kind of conversation openers are really the best. It's very difficult for parents to keep track of all of the different platforms and all of the different capabilities of those platforms. We understand that. We have a lot of materials on our website. I think you're showing perhaps some of that now on the screen. Again, to guide parents, educational materials for teachers and schools to use in a school setting, but also for parents to initiate those discussions with their children about what they're doing online.
Yoda, we've talked about the role that tech companies are required to have in reporting and accountability. What about the law enforcement arm of this? Because, the perpetrators of this exploitation, sometimes it's hard to catch, right? You talk about digital footprints and, the accountability that way. But when it comes to law enforcement, what pieces could still be strengthened to make sure that those who are enacting these acts of exploitation are held accountable?
Absolutely, and thank you for asking that question. It's a really great question because the more reports that NCMEC receives, the more reports that tech company makes, ultimately every single report that comes into NCMEC does go out to a law enforcement agency. So not only does their volume increase, but all those intricacies about offenders and users and how people can mask their identity and be more or less untraceable online, they create real challenges for law enforcement. So we always are in favor, of course, of there simply just being more resources, more training, more capabilities for law enforcement to really stay on the cutting edge, try to be one step ahead of offenders who often are very savvy around the technology of how to exploit children online. But again, more information, more reports, more robust reports with information law enforcement can act on quickly to recover a child, to identify an offender, and begin that investigation process. Those are really the key things.
Yeah, this is really a team effort, Yoda, when it comes to preventing, combating child exploitation, especially online. As we know, AI is playing quite the role as well. I'll leave the last word with you, though. Was there anything that we might have left out that you wanted to add that we didn't touch on?
I appreciate that you are highlighting this act. It's such a simple act. It was so very bipartisan from the very first moment it was introduced. Obviously, Senator Ossoff and Senator Blackburn in the Senate, and then we had our House representatives as well supporting this bill. It moved incredibly quickly because I think everybody understood the nature of the danger that children are facing online. And I think that's key for policymakers to understand. And like you said, we are all in this together, whether it is nonprofits like NCMEC, Congress, state legislators, but also the tech companies and families and others who are, part of this world of children being online. We all need to play our part to keep children safer.